Hey, this is Max from UNFTR reporting for the MeidasTouch Network, and today I have some scandalous and salacious breaking news about the Epstein files. I'm sorry, I don't. I actually have inflation data for you, and I was just trying to make it more interesting. But I do have some good news for Trump fans out there. At the White House Faith Luncheon on July 14th, the president shared some pretty awesome news about the U.S. economy and inflation.
The economy is roaring, business confidence is soaring, incomes are up, prices are down, and inflation is dead.
Wow, I guess our work here is done, right? Oh, wait, what's that? Oh, breaking news. I'm just getting this in that the June inflation numbers are out as of the very next day. Let's check with CNN.
All right, we do have some breaking news, some brand new numbers on inflation, up both month to month and year to year.
No surprises here to anyone with a pulse and a brain. The June inflation print is out, and oh my goodness, prices keep going up. What a shock, said no one ever. But that's only part of the story, of course. But we have to tell that piece of it to unravel the bigger picture. So let's get to it. All right, so let's dig right into the numbers because I think you're going to spot a trend here. According to the BLS, the, quote, all items index rose 2.7% for the 12 months ending June, after rising 2.4% over the 12 months ending in May. The all items less food and energy index rose 2.9% over the last 12 months. Now, before we break things down even further, it's important to view it as a trend, so let's look at the data over time. What we're seeing here is that inflation is not transitory, as the administration had hoped. You can see where the sense of optimism was in the early part of 2025 when inflation decelerated in February and actually fell in March, but then it reared its head again in April, slightly again in May, and now you can see that it's just heading right back up. So a few points before we look at the components which tell the only real story that matters to U.S. consumers. We've said all along that inflation would start to show up in the data in a meaningful way beginning in June because companies would have started to turn over the cheaper inventory that they stockpiled ahead of the tariff war. Upon replenishing, core inputs would start to push the numbers higher and higher. Now, we're not the only ones who've been saying this, obviously, but it's one of the primary reasons that the FOMC has been reluctant to move on interest rates. But the real damage has yet to be seen, and you're probably going to see it bleed out even more in the months ahead. Now, I'm going to give you two big caveats here. The first is that energy prices are a drag on these figures, so it's always important to exclude them. See, when a conflict breaks out, like bombing Iran, or it heightens anywhere on the planet for that matter, speculators push energy prices higher and it can have an immediate impact. Now, the flip side of that is also true that when geopolitical forces are calmer, you get a sense of what energy really looks like because it correlates more closely to supply and demand. So the other caveat is that an economic slowdown will have a muted effect on inflation going forward. So if we continue to fall further into the Trump recession and global demand cools off, it has a double impact on inflation, or at least it should. Energy prices typically cool pretty quickly in a recession because our reserves and our production are solid and the gap widens between supply and demand. But it also means that in very sensitive segments of the economy, like new automobiles or RVs, certain durable items, producers start to cut prices to woo consumers back. So the problem for the administration is that the tariffs are being actualized in the inflation data already. It's hard to imagine considering we have the world's best deal maker personally writing these deals.
That's how this administration works. We let the greatest deal maker who's ever been in that office, he makes the deals.
These forces are already pulling back on certain segments, as we'll see in a moment, which means the tariffs are already pushing prices higher. And this is the dreaded stagflationary environment that everyone wanted to avoid, including Trump. It's why he's so adamant about pushing Powell to lower interest rates to spark consumer refinancing and corporate debt restructuring and hiring.
We have a bad Fed chairman, really bad. If he would lower the rates, and I tried being nice to the guy, it doesn't help. He's like a knucklehead. No, he's a knucklehead.
See, it gives an artificial boost to the economy in a short-term period, but the Fed's dual mandate is to manage both inflation and unemployment. So if there's inflation, Conventional theory is to keep interest rates high to suppress it. And when there's high unemployment, they lower them to spur investment and hiring. But right now, inflation is going up, and so is unemployment. And that's why the Fed is stuck between a rock and a hard place, at least on paper and according to their dual mandate. But it's not stopping the administration from hammering Powell over and over on rates, which shows both a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation and a bit of desperation.
I think the key thing here, and why Jay Powell is so wrong about not lowering rates, is to recognize the enormous ability of the world to absorb the tariffs. It's like Navarro's law, like the bigger screw job that we're getting from any given country, right? The more that country is able to absorb the tariffs.
Now, I had to include a Navarro clip for a couple of reasons. The first is that these aren't deals. They're shakedowns. They're just one-sided demands to implement tariffs on dozens of nations, which will bring money into the federal coffers, but only, again, for the short term. But in the long run, the world is just going to reorder the supply chain to reduce their dependence on our dwindling manufacturing sector. It's just math. But the other thing that amuses the hell out of me is how he refers to it as Navarro's law, as if that's a thing. And I have to show you this because if you're not familiar with Peter Navarro, he's actually considered somewhat of a joke in economic and political circles, even among Republicans, because of stuff like this. This is an excerpt from an NPR piece that talks about how Navarro has written economics and trade books and more than once cited a source named Ron Vara to prove his theories. But Ron Vara is just an anagram of Navarro. He's completely made up. You know, in another universe, if these guys weren't so damaging and so destructive, this would be funny. Anyway, let's dig into the segmentation to show why the figures from June are way more devastating for the consumer than the corporate media is telling you just by parroting the headline numbers. Because saying that inflation went up 0.3% doesn't sound as terrible as telling you that it technically tripled month over month. But if you carry it out over the year, we're back into 3 to 4% inflation territory in a best case scenario. There's inflation that hits periodically, and then there's unavoidable inflation that hits everyone all the time. So not everyone is impacted always by gas prices. Not everyone is shopping for clothes all the time. Not everyone is looking for a new or a used car, and not everyone has to get a prescription. Now, at some point, they may all come into play in your daily life, but the point is that these are episodic in our lives. The two unavoidable and universal inputs to every household budget, however, are food and shelter. And this is where the "it's not that bad" narrative begins to break down. As you can see here, food increased 3% year over year in the June print, and shelter increased 3.8%. Point being, not all inflation is equal. And here's where the narrative and the spin from the administration and the mainstream media starts to fall apart. We have preliminary June data on weekly wages, and it shows an increase in the average weekly earnings between June of 2024 and June of 2025 of approximately 3.29%. So set against core inflation year over year for the same period of 2.7%, and you get a feel for why the media and the administration are so tepid in their responses to inflation data. Essentially, the consensus view is that so long as wages are increasing more than inflation, everything's okay for the moment. And they reflect this in what they call real earnings releases as well. In fact, here's what they had to say about that. Quote, from June 2024 to June 2025, real average hourly earnings increased 1%, seasonally adjusted. The change in real average hourly earnings combined with a 0.3% decrease in the average work week resulted in a 0.7% increase in real average weekly earnings over this period, end quote. So 2 important takeaways here. First off, it's not a fair comparison to benchmark total wage growth against total inflation. They're setting wages against inflation to arrive at real wage growth of 0.7% when we know that the inflation numbers are being pulled down by the periodic inflation figures and not the persistent ones like shelter and food. It's just not a one-to-one. Food is up 3%, shelter's up 3.8%. That's the real benchmark. in which case it demonstrates clearly how the consumer is totally underwater. So you're not nuts. Your money isn't going as far as it used to. And that's why people are cutting back on spending already. Now, the second point is that the wage figures are drawing on employment figures, obviously. And we know that the piece of the pie is shrinking from our prior episodes that we've done here on Meidas. So the great squeeze is on. And listen, I don't do these because you can do something about the way we collect data or just to shout at the rain. These breakdowns are important because these figures are what they use to rationalize their policies and sell them to us. So hopefully it gives you the information and the power to call BS. But also, I feel like it also helps assuage some of the psychological pain. And that's going to be important in the months ahead as we fall deeper and deeper into the Trump recession. There's a psychological trauma that comes with not being able to pay your bills. When recessions like the one we're in right now happen, people's first instinct is to go on like everything's fine. And if you see everyone else pretending that things are fine, it actually induces a higher amount of personal stress, like you must be doing something wrong. But this economy has been terrible for a long, long time for the majority of Americans. But what's reflected back to you through the media with these charts and these graphs and these figures is that everything is okay. And as we've said before, it's why the Democrats lost. They didn't acknowledge the pain. It's why Zoran Mamdani shocked the world in New York City, because he acknowledged the pain. What's important about the work we do here on Meidas is that we're building the proper narrative to make sure that we're all singing from the same hymnal. Remember, there's more of us, but it won't feel like it if we're all saying and thinking different things because someone else is manufacturing a false narrative that's winning the day. So no, you're not the only one suffering right now. It's okay. Give yourself a break. Inflation is real. The labor market is shrinking. Real wages are declining for the overwhelming majority of Americans. And now that pain is being shared with our Canadian brothers and sisters and every other country that we've decided to put in our crosshairs for no apparent reason. For the MeidasTouch Network, I'm Max from UNFTR. You can subscribe to our YouTube at UNFTR and visit our website, unftr.com, to sign up for our free weekly newsletter, access our archive of content and original material, and connect with us on social. Until then, I'll catch you next time.
Can't get enough Meidas? Check out the Meidas Plus Substack for ad-free articles, reports, podcasts, daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, and more. Sign up for free now at MeidasPlus.com.